Hey guys, how's it going? It's your boy Luke back again for another NFL live stream. This time for week 7 in our main slate picks. What we're going to do here is we're going to go position by position through my projections, talk about some of my favorite players for this week, whether it's for DFS, whether it's for season long fantasy, and of course, throughout the entire process. If you guys have any questions at all, feel free to go ahead and put them down in the chat. I'll get to them whenever I have a second, whenever I can see them over on the right side of my screen, that kind of thing. Without further delay, let's hop into a little bit of an injury report. So I'm going to start off with who we know is going to be in and out as of right now. So for the 1 o'clock games, first of all, we know Latavius Murray is not going to be playing. We knew that quite a while ago. We do expect Devontae Freeman to get a majority of the snaps, probably a 65-35 share between him and Le'Veon Bell. Tyson Williams has not been a part of the rotation for the last 2 games, has been kind of rolled out. They obviously want to rely on some of these more established running backs. And Sammy Watkins also out for the Ravens. That means Rashad Bateman is going to be starting for them. In terms of the Carolina Panthers, we have Terrence Marshall already out, Alex Erickson, who's questionable but excited to suit up. As a result, Shea Smith, not somebody you're going to want to play in fantasy or anything like that, but he is going to be starting. If you're in a really deep fantasy league and you need somebody off waivers, you could go to him. He's at least going to play. From the Chiefs-Titans game, we have Tyreek Hill as questionable. He's fully practiced this week, though, so it's just a precautionary tag. He should be good to go. For the Dolphins, we have Devontae Parker not expected to suit up. We don't have a definite word on that yet, but as of right now, highly questionable. It's more of a game time decision. Again, I haven't projected out right now. In terms of some of the injuries for the Giants, and there's quite a few here. We have Saquon Barkley, who's going to be out. Kenny Golladay out. Kadarius Toney out. Sterling Shepard might not play. He was expected to play throughout the entire week, but ended up having an aggravation to that injury on Friday. Also hurt on Saturday, so we still don't know about him. If he's not able to play, you're looking at John Ross, Darius Slayton, Evan Ingram, Caden Smith is pretty much the only pass catchers on that team. All of them not typically guys that we're looking at on fantasy, but without Sterling Shepard, their target shares are going to be much higher than we would typically expect. And they're in their relatively high over-under game as well. For the Jets, we have a couple guys questionable, but other than Tyler Kroft, all of them expected to suit up. Because Kroft is not playing, Ryan Griffin is going to start. But again, this is the Jets we're talking about. They're up there in Foxborough as well. Not going to be great weather. It's expected to be very windy. And you're dealing with one of the best defensive teams in the NFL, a team that was actually able to shut down the Buccaneers, let alone a team like this Jets team. So do not expect good things from them. And lastly, let's talk about the Titans. So we have Julio Jones, who's questionable. It's looking like he's going to suit up. He ended up going down in that last game, but he's been very gimpy for quite some time. So Julio Jones, not somebody who was in my player pool anyways. He will be suiting up at the very least, though. Kind of takes away from Nick Westbrook-Ikhine. I did expect Julio Jones to be a little bit more limited. Ikhine to get some more snaps, but with Jones active, not necessarily sure that ends up happening anymore. And finally, for the Washington football team, we have a few guys out. We have Curtis Samuel and Cam Sims. We already knew that at the beginning of the week. So guys like Adam Humphries, people like Diami Brown are going to get a few more snaps. Both of them are going to be in my player pool as a result. I really like that game in terms of its over-under as well. Antonio Gibson, questionable. So we're not sure the kind of snap load he's going to get. We know he's at least going to play. He's been active through this injury for quite some time, but ended up leaving last game. That's something that we haven't seen this year. Typically played through the injury, was able to get to the 15 to 20 touch mark. The last game, J.D. McKissic had to finish out the game. So that is not a good sign. He's already been dealing with the injury for the entire year. Now it's affecting him in game. So I was huge on Antonio Gibson at the beginning of the week. Now I still have him in my player pool, but rather than him being, 35-40% owned in terms of my exposure, somebody I was trying to get a lot of leverage on, he's more of a middle in play now. Lastly, let's talk about some of the 4 o'clock injuries. And again, we don't have definite word on many of these at all. We just want to go ahead and get them out there. Allen Robinson's questionable. He should be able to play. Damian Williams was cleared from COVID protocol, so Khalil Herbert will not be starting anymore. That will be Damian Williams. Expected to split snaps, though. Jimmy Graham out. We have DeAndre Swift is questionable. He's been questionable the entire year. He should be good to go. Same thing with TJ Hawkinson. He ended up practicing this week, which was good. For the Texans, we have a bunch of their wide receivers and tight ends as questionable. But all of them, as of right now, siding towards active. Amendola is going to be playing as well. We saw him play last week. It was very effective. Somebody who's probably going to kick Nico Collins out of the rotation there in Texas. Chris Conley will still end up starting at wide receivers, probably a number 3 wide receiver. I would assume Amendola would be number 2. Of course, Cook's number 1. As a result, I am targeting that offense in terms of fantasy, which we'll get to at some point here when we get over the quarterbacks. But Davis Mills is so cheap, and that game is going to be a blowout. So there could very well be some garbage time production. We'll get to that, though. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. For the Raiders, Darren Waller's questionable. He should be okay, though. It was a late ad. It was something we didn't know about at the beginning of the week. Probably flared up on Thursday or Friday, but again, he's questionable. He's not doubtful or anything like that. AB's not playing. We know Gronkowski's not playing. We already knew about that for the Buccaneers. OJ Howard's questionable, but he practiced fully on Friday. It had no change on Saturday, so it should be good to go. Cool. So that is it for the injuries. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to start sharing my projections here for you guys. So let me go ahead, share this. We're going to go to our quarterbacks to start, and we have a question down chat, and it's a perfect time to answer this because we're hopping right into the quarterback. So Ryan Wilson says, "Hey Luke, I'm new to your channel. What's a sneaky game stack you like this week? By the way, great golf content." Thanks, man. Appreciate it. Excited that you're over here for the football content as well. So do I have, let me see, is it sharing the right screen? Yes. Cool. Let me bring up quarterback on my end. There we go. So a sneaky game stack. So for me, there's a few I'm targeting, right? So first and foremost, we have Derek Carr, somebody I talked about in my core plays video. I like the situation against the Eagles defense. They're a decent front seven, but their secondary outside of Darius Slay has a lot to ask for. So I don't hate going there. Derek Carr has been very effective to this point of the year. Another guy you could go to, Taylor Heineke, is somebody I am playing. The Packers defense has looked good at times. They've also gotten exposed at times. Just think of week 1 when they allowed 5 touchdowns to Jameis Winston. So Taylor Heineke is a little bit of a sneaky spot there, right? He's $5,200. The guy I just aforementioned, just talked about a little bit, Davis Mills. He was in my core plays video. It's not that offense is going to go put up 35, 40 points or anything like that, but they're very likely to end up scoring around 18 to 24 points just because of garbage time. The Cardinals are going to go out. They're going to get their end on offense. They're going to put up 35, 42 points, that kind of thing. There's a reason why they're 18-point favorites. But anytime you have that kind of game script where a team's up by 2-3 touchdowns, the other team is going to get a ton of yardage. They're going to get a ton of production. And at $4,900, he doesn't really have to do all that much. You have Brandon Cooks on that team. He's probably going to get at least 10 targets here. Somebody who's one of my favorite plays on the entire slate. So that's one of the legs of stack right there. Another person you could use in that stack, you could use Nico Collins. But I'd much rather use somebody like Chris Conley or Danny Amendola. Both of them are extremely cheap. So by using that kind of stack where you take a Mills, a Cooks, and then one of those super cheap options as the number 2 or 3 wide receiver there, you're able to spend it for whatever the heck you want, right? You could end up taking A.J. Brown. You could take a Derrick Henry. You could try to get that kind of access to a mini stack to that Chiefs-Titans game. You could take a Tyreek Hill. You can actually build a lineup like that if you build that kind of stack. So hopefully that answers your question right there. I'm going to have that in about 5 to 6% of my builds. So a Davis Mills stack, which again, it seems crazy, but it gives you so many options to access a lot of these other high total games with a relatively high potential there at quarterback on his own, right? Again, Davis Mills, all he has to do is go out there, put up like 250 yards, 2 touchdowns, and that can end up paying off at that salary. So let's talk about some of the stud options I like, though. We cannot avoid Patrick Mahomes on this slate. So I was running lineups before we ended up getting on the show here. After we go position by position, I'm going to talk a little bit about my initial player pool, which as soon as we get off the show is going to change, obviously. There's going to be news that comes out, things I need to adjust in terms of ownership, leverage, exposure, that kind of stuff. But Patrick Mahomes in my first sim of 1,000 lineups was owned in every single lineup. And the way I run my stacks is I run a stack in every lineup. That's what I'm doing at least for this week. It's not like that every single week. Where I'm going to put at least 1 running back or tight end or wide receiver from the team that I'm stacking with, actually 2, and then 1 from the opposing team. So you're talking at least a 4-player stack, sometimes even 5-player stacks I'll be implementing. And Patrick Mahomes was still 100% owned. That is extremely telling. That is the optimizer, just screaming in all caps. If they're able to do that, play Patrick Mahomes. So I expected him to be something like 25, 30% owned or something like that. And in my metrics and in my modeling, he was right around 19, 20%. But a quick glance across the industry has him right around 10 to 12% ownership. So in reality, I definitely think it comes in closer to the middle of that, something like 15 or 16% ownership. And as a result, I'm getting to him. I mean, that's low enough to where you can still get exposure, that kind of thing, to a Patrick Mahomes, and still be able to take stacks from other games, right? The issue is, at least for me, at 35-40% ownership, which at one part of the week, I thought he might be that highly owned. He was going to have to be a fade, right? You're playing 50-60% ownership in your own pool just to get leverage on him. And then on top of that, you're just the opportunity cost of not having those other stacks. So I'm really glad to see the ownership where it is. At least in my projections, I was a little bit more bullish on his ownership than it really was in reality. We have a comment down here. Shepard is now out. I expected that. Yeah, he had that injury. I believe it was yesterday or even the day before. They said that he was siding towards out. So that's good to know. So Darius Slayton, it's going to be Evan Ingram show, I guess. That's going to be an ugly game. I'm going to be playing a good amount of that Panthers defense. I don't see how they're going to put up a lot of production. Devontae Booker, the only reason he was productive in that one game is because the offense passing the ball that game was excellent. They had a lot of holes opened up because of that. Yeah, I'm not loving that Giants game, to be honest with you now. Aaron Rodgers, they're at $7,500. He's going to be one of my premium stacks of this week. Don't love the price tag at $7,500. It's a little bit prohibitive. It keeps me off of some of the more expensive options at wide receiver or even tight end. But I like going to it just because of the potential here. I mean, this Washington defense has been atrocious for this point of the year. One of the worst defenses in terms of matchup in the NFL. See a bottom 10 defense against the quarterbacks. Ownership's not crazy on them. You can see I have them at 6% ownership. Across the industry, we're in that same kind of range right there. So I don't hate going to them at all. Somebody who I was targeting at the beginning of the week still will be at this point. I like matching them up with somebody like Devontae Adams, obviously. It's just a little bit expensive. Devontae Adams actually isn't in my pool right now. So the stacks that I'm really using with somebody like Aaron Rodgers, it's a Robert Tonyan. It's going to somebody like an Aaron Jones that are a little bit more affordable. I still think there's plenty of ways that they all end up paying off together. A lot of people won't stack Aaron Rodgers and Aaron Jones together, but you have to remember that more than half of Aaron Jones' touchdowns come via the air. So a lot of people undersell that fact. I mean, obviously he's a running back. He's still going to get rushing touchdowns, but not quite as detrimental or not quite as negatively correlated as a lot of people think. Lamar Jackson down here at $7,400. I'm going to have slightly more ownership than the field. I had him about 15% in my initial build. And at $7,400, that's a good enough price tag for somebody like him with his rushing upside. He's capable of putting up 25, 26 real fantasy points. I also like some of the stacking options with him, particularly some of the value plays. So you could use Lamar Jackson at captain, and one of my favorite stacks, and I have a ton of ownership to this. So actually I have him in 17% of my lineup. Sorry, I had to bring it up here. In all 17% of those, I have at least one of Devontae Freeman and Rashad Bateman, and then usually somebody like Mark Andrews or a Marquise Brown or something like that to round it out. But I do have some of them that are Lamar Jackson, Rashad Bateman, and Devontae Freeman, which to me is extremely interesting. I mean, I have Freeman projected at 16 points right now. Now we're not talking about running backs, but it's an important situation to talk about. I think he's going to get about 65 to 70% of the touches in terms of the backfield there. Le'Veon Bell is just washed up, guys. He's trash. Steeler fandom aside, grudge aside, he's just not what he was before. It's very obvious when you see him, even how he's built. He doesn't look nearly as athletic as he used to, or nearly as strong or muscular as he used to. I mean, that should be telltale sign number one right there. Guy had a lot of McDonald's when he was in retirement. Let's just say that. Let's go down to Matthew Stafford at $7,100. If you're running any type of statistical modeling or anything like that this week, he's going to pop off of the board. So in GPPs, I do expect him to come in with a lot more ownership than I initially expected. I had him at 4.4% and taking a look at some of the sentiment around the industry earlier on the week. But now when we consider the modeling, especially what I was looking at this morning, the modeling I use isn't anything, it's not rocket science, right? So it's obviously more accurate than a lot of the other parts of the industry. That's how I have my edge. But it's again, what I look at in terms of my initial optimizations, my initial runs, is usually very reflective of ownership. And Matthew Stafford was popping in that build, so I expect him to come in a little bit higher owned than I initially thought. I'm not going to have a ton of stacks of them, so I haven't owned right now after a lot of that manipulation at around 8.5% ownership, which I'm expecting that to be close to what the field ends up at. So I'm not huge on him. I'm not hugely against him. I talked about him in my core plays video earlier on the week. It's just the stacking options with this team are very expensive. Talking about a $7,100 quarterback. talking about probably trying to use Cooper Kupp, who's $8,400. There's a lot of opportunity cost that comes with that. Even Tyler Higbee, even people like Darrell Henderson, if you want to stack them with a running back, are all really expensive. So it's just a hard situation to try and stack up. And with my strategy this week, of trying to run at least 2 players from the same team with a quarterback and a buyback, it's not great with the Lions as a buyback, right? That offense is dreadful. A lot of these tertiary options are out. Remember, says Ramondre Stevenson out. Yeah, I had him projected as out anyways. He hasn't been a huge part of that offense to this point of the year. I have Damian Harris as one of my favorite plays on the slate, so that actually just bolsters that a little bit even more. Damian Harris, I have projected for 1.3 touchdowns in this game. He's just going to beat up on the Jets, and he's going to be a big reason why. Let's talk about Jalen Hurts. He was a fade for me in my video. He's going to remain a fade. His ownership's actually gone up since the last time that I shot. I have him closer to 11% ownership right now. So Jalen Hurts is $6,900. It's going to be a fade. Raiders defense has been a lot better than people have given them credit for. They've shut down teams like the Steelers, which isn't necessarily saying a lot, but they showed very good pass rush in that game. They've showed a very good pass rush in other games as well. You can see that's reflected in their rank right there. They're a top 15 defense against the pass, which, again, that's not anything mind-boggling, but that's a lot better than what we've seen from them in the past. So he will remain a fade for me. Ryan Tannehill, you can see I have him down as a fade. That's just because the ownership on him is closer to 6% right now. And for me to get any type of significant leverage would require me to allocate at least 10 to 15% of my exposure to him, which I'm not necessarily comfortable doing. Again, he hasn't had a very good start to the year, though he is a little bit cheaper. The stacking options are a little bit cheaper as well. I like using Derrick Henry in that kind of stack, which is obviously not very cheap, which is why I'm off of it as well. I think if you are going to use Ryan Tannehill, you probably want to use Derrick Henry in that stack as well, as whether he's getting a rushing touchdown or two, or whether he's catching a touchdown or two. And it stays competitive. Ryan Tannehill is going to have a lot to do with that. Getting down to Sam Darnold, $5,900. He is somebody I am using in stacks this week as well. So wasn't in my poll at the beginning of the week, but ended up creeping in that first run that I just did right before we got on here. I like the matchup against the Giants. This Giants team, particularly on the offense, is dreadful. So that doesn't necessarily help Sam Darnold, but perhaps they end up throwing a few turnovers, end up fumbling the ball a few times in their own zone. Sam Darnold could get some good field position, so I don't hate that. It's a minuscule boost at the very best, but it's at least still a tangible boost. They've been decent against the pass at this point. You know, Bradbury has been one of the better corners in the NFL. He's generated quite a few turnovers. The game total reflects what my sentiment on the Panthers. You know, they're the clear favorites here, and I like going to them as a result. Matt Ryan and Tua are being owned up the ass for some reason. So I had them at 8.8 and 6.4% ownership. When I was running some of my optimal lineups, when I ended up excluding Patrick Mahomes because he was 100% owned at first, Matt Ryan and Tua were like the next guys to pop. They were at like 20, 30% ownership apiece. So I do expect them to have even more steam than I may have expected at the beginning of the week. A lot of that comes down to the game total here. It's over a 47-point over-under, which, believe it or not, is actually one of the higher numbers on this slate. I mean, obviously that Chiefs-Titans game just blows everyone else out of the water by almost a clear 10 points. But a lot of people are going to go there. And again, Matt Ryan could dog shit to this point of the year. He's completely dependent on passing the ball. Tua Tagovailoa, he also hasn't looked very good. He's a little bit reliant on the short ball. He's not throwing very many deep passes these days. And I'm going to be off of that game. There's just too much ownership there for the upside, which I do think is there. It's not non-existent. There is some upside there, but is it worth the ownership and the allocation that you need to put out there? No, it's not. Daniel Jones there at $5,400. I'm not going to be playing him. I was at the beginning of the week. He was projecting well, but now that you don't have Sterling Shepard, like I mentioned, that really changes my sentiment on him. I'm just not huge on that situation there. When you're dealing with people like Darius Slayton, Colin Johnson, John Ross as your wide receiver core, and while they're all extremely cheap, again, you have to question the upside, right? So if you're using a stack like that, sure, you can go to somebody like a Derrick Henry. You can play Tyreek Hill together. You probably even squeeze in a Darren Waller, that kind of thing at tight end, but you're going to be dealing with some real low-level options for your stack. And anytime you're playing in the NFL, you want to make sure your stack is the most solid part of your team, right? It has to be the foundation of your lineup. That's where a majority of your fantasy production is going to come from. And if you're not confident in your stack, you probably shouldn't be confident in your lineup, no matter who it opens up at every other position. You'd have to be absolutely flawless, perfect with all of those spend up options to even have a remote chance with that kind of lineup. So just keep that in mind. Taylor Heineke, $5,200. I like going there. You can see that I was on him at the beginning of the week. I'm still there. This Packer team is going to put up a lot of points. So as a result, Heineke's going to, at the very least, going to get some garbage time production. He's also been a lot more effective than people want to give him credit for. Terry McLaurin is a good stacking option. You can use somebody like Ricky Seals-Jones, who's been priced up to this point of the week, but I think it's a very fair price on somebody like him. We already talked about Davis Mills. Jared Goff I'm playing as well. I'm suckered into the revenge narrative. Let's just say that. I think there's a chance that he ends up popping there. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to go through my running back projections. So let me go ahead and share that. There we go. And let me bring it up on my end. All right. So running back on this slate's a little weird. The pricing is all over the place. We have some really big gaps in the pricing that open up all over the place. So at the top, we have Derrick Henry. It's not even close in terms of price. What is he? $1,700 more than the next guy? Yeah. And then after him, we have almost another $1,000 to Darrell Henderson. So for me, Derrick Henry, I have him in 7% of my build right now, which is going to be less than what the field has him at, and I'm all right with that. I'm using him strictly as a buyback option for some of my Mahomes stacks. So it's just the price tag, right? It hinders you at a lot of other positions, and particularly at wide receiver, we have some guys in that $6,000-$7,000 range that I really like on this slate. And for that extra $2,000 difference, I'm spending up and getting one or two of those extra wide receivers as a result. Going from a $5,500 wide receiver the whole way up to a $65,000-$7,000 wide receiver is a bigger difference than going from a $6,600 running back to even a $5,600 running back that's starting. There's just the gaps at wide receiver are a little bit more drastic this week. So I'm trying to spend up there for a majority of my picks. So Derrick Henry, you can see he's in my pool. I just have less than the field. So I want to make that very apparent. Even 3 times less the field. So if he ends up going off, I at least have a chance to still have an optimal lineup, but won't be making or breaking my week either way. Aaron Jones at $7,500 is somebody I am playing a lot more of. That $1,700 of salary relief is a big deal. I also think that he has a lot of upside against this Washington team. Against the run, they are a top 11 defense, but against the pass, one of the worst teams in the NFL. And Aaron Jones is a PPR-centric running back. I think a lot of people discount that fact. He's good enough for that price tag. He's also somebody who has spike weeks. He's going to have those flub games where he only puts up 8 to 12 points, that kind of thing. But then he's going to have those 30 to 35 point games that really could win you a GPP. So Derrick Henry, very similar upside with these two running backs, in my opinion. You're just getting a much better price tag. Also a lot less ownership. So Aaron Jones, I had at 14.3% ownership earlier on yesterday. Now I'm probably in single digits. A lot of people are going to Derrick Henry. It seems like a lot of people are allocating that salary there. So I like going to Aaron Jones even more. Darrell Henderson Jr. was also one of my core picks at the beginning of the week. It's $6,600 against this Lions team. Obviously really like the matchup. They've been the worst team against the run in the NFL to this point. Also a relatively large spread here. So perhaps instead of using a ton of Matthew Stafford, again, we talked about it before. He was the popular optimizer play. A lot of the sharp people, especially in single entry kind of contests, are going to go to somebody like a Matthew Stafford. I think a way to get access to that good of game flow is to go to somebody like Henderson, right? A running back who could vulture 2 or 3 of those touchdowns, that kind of thing, really hinder somebody like Stafford's production and in their own put up a ceiling performance. So I like going there at $6,600. I believe he's my second highest owned. Let me check, actually. 1 second, guys. I can quickly check. I have my run up. Aaron Jones, 35% ownership. So he's my highest owned running back on the slate. I think that's well warranted. All right, let's keep going down. Cordell Patterson, I did not have him by poll. I do now. I can tell you as of right now. And I actually have 19% Cordell Patterson. So it's a significant portion as well. Again, somebody who has had a ton of PPR upside to this point of the year. And if you want to get some access to this Falcons-Dolphins game, I think it's a good way to do it. And he's at least a slightly more unique fashion. He's expensive. A lot of people don't want to allocate all of that salary to somebody like Cordell Patterson. Leonard Fournette, I have 27% of as of right now. I don't have any Tom Brady stacks. I can't really tell you why. I think a lot of it just comes down to the price. Also, the stacking options on that team, they really just weren't popping for me. But somebody who was popping from that game in a way that I can get access to that blowout would be Leonard Fournette. This is, again, one of the higher spreads in the entire slate. The Bears have been absolutely dreadful. I do expect that defense on the Tampa Bay side of things to really put up a good score. They're one of my higher owned defenses on the slate. Leonard Fournette going to get plenty of touches, probably 25 when it comes down to the rushing touches and passing touches that he's going to get. So I like going there a whole lot. That's what I'm going to use in terms to get access to that game. Chuba Hubbard was a play I was looking at going into the week, still is, just a little bit less bullish on him than I was at the beginning of the week. Guys like Cordell Patterson, guys even like Leonard Fournette, I've just surpassed them in my projections. So as a result, just not getting quite as much of them as I would have thought at the beginning of the week. Antonio Gibson, he ended up having the injury flare up during the week. He is going to play, but again, he ended up coming out of the game last time. So I'm not as huge on him. I think he's going to get closer to 65% of the snaps at running back this week rather than his usual 85, 90%. And it's not enough to make somebody like J.D. McKissic a great player or anything like that. I mean, he gets a slight boost. I have him projected for 10.7 points, J.D. McKissic, and we'll get to J.D. here in a little bit. Let's see. Actually, a little bit higher than that, 12.8 points. Just not somebody I'm overly thrilled about using either way in terms of both these running backs. So he's in my pool still. I have him at like 10%, but I'm not sure if that's going to last by the time we get to game time. I just want to hear more about the injury situation. I want to hear what some of the beat reporters are saying about his availability. By the way, Damian Williams is going to play. See, he was questionable with COVID, but he was cleared. Khalil Herbert will not be starting as a result. So, and by the way, you see I have him projected there for 0 points. That was before that news came out. Probably closer to a Buccaneers defense, probably closer to like a 12-point projection, something like that. Not any one day I would have put in my pool anyways. That defense is legit, particularly against the run. They have a very good pass rush as well. You see Khalil Herbert says in for Williams. That was before the news. So that would be probably closer to a 7-8 point projection now. All right, let's go down to Miles Sanders. He's one of my favorite plays on the slate. I have him at 31% ownership, actually exposure in my pool. So the Raiders defense, they are stout, but if there is a way to attack them, it's on the ground. This team has been completely blasted by the media, asking them to run the ball. And last game, every single time they run the ball, the crowd went nuts. And they were extremely effective when they went and ran the ball. They averaged well over 5 yards a carry. So I do expect that to be something that this team tries to factor in a little bit more. Miles Sanders at that kind of price tag, if he puts up something like 18, 19 fantasy points, that is going to be more than enough to pay off. And that is well within his range of outcomes, particularly if he starts to see an uptick in his usage, which we expect, especially from all this media pressure, which is a legit thing with some of these teams, and particularly the younger head coaches like they have over there in Philadelphia. They're much more willing and much more susceptible to a lot of that media pressure. Somebody like Bill Belichick is going to tell him to fuck off and go on his way. But somebody like, I forget his name, Sarkinson or something like that, I was going to be a lot more willing to listen to the media just because he doesn't want to lose his job. He doesn't want everyone to hate him. Jamal Williams, I don't love going to. I mean, he's just been seeing less and less usage as the weeks have gone on, which I do not personally agree with. I think he's actually the better running back between the two if you're comparing him and Swift. But the Lions, despite all of the advanced metrics, continue to give Williams the ball less and less. Poor guy needs traded. Every single team he goes to, the teams just underutilize him, don't understand that he's probably the best back on their team. Even when he was up there with the Packers, I still argue that Williams was better than Jones. I still would to this day in terms of talent. I do not understand teams don't utilize him correctly. Devonta Freeman is not going to be chalk like I expected. He's actually coming in closer to like 10, 11% ownership, which makes him an even better play in my opinion. I have him at about 33% exposure in my pool. One of my higher owned running backs, also somebody I like squeezing in at the flex position, just in case I want to spend up for some wide receivers or even one of the premium stacks in terms of a quarterback. Tyson Williams, if you want to go to a complete flyer, you could, but I'm not going to. I see a lot of the carries going through Freeman, and then, of course, Le'Veon Bell if they absolutely have to use a washed-up fat running back. But yeah, that's it at running back. Let's go to our wide receivers now. Share screen. Wide receiver ranks. All right. Let me make sure all is good. There it is. All right. And I'll remind you guys, if you have any questions, feel free to go ahead and put them down in the chat. I'll get to them whenever I see them. It can be for season-long fantasy. It could be for Draftkings DFS like we're covering right here. Hell, it could even be for Sunday Night Football, whatever you want to talk about. We will be doing a stream tomorrow tomorrow afternoon. I will mention as well, that'll be for Monday Night Football. We're not doing one for Sunday Night Football tonight. Just too much stuff going on today. All right. So let's get into these wide receivers. You can see Davante Adams. I hoped that he was going to be in my poll at the beginning of the week, but when I take a look at my exposure, and let me just confirm this. Yeah, I have 1% Davante Adams right now. That's probably something I'm going to try to change before game time, but not something I'm necessarily going to force, right? If my optimizers, if my projections are leading me elsewhere, I tend to trust them. But in terms of a pure projection basis, 23.8 points, that's exactly what you're looking for. I'm assuming the reason I'm not getting him in a ton of my lineups is just because trying to stack $7,500 Aaron Jones and $8,900 Davante Adams together usually isn't doable. I mean, even if you add somebody like a Robert Tonyan to that mix or a Randall Cobb that are extremely cheap, it's a tough task. So we'll have to see how it all shakes out before game time. But there are a few people I'm going to look to try and force in. He would be at the top of that list. We do have a question I see down here in the chat. Is Mark Ingram a good cheap option? So I wouldn't say he is, just because they are going to get killed by the Cardinals. The Cardinals are arguably the best team in the NFL. Not as stout on defense as people are really giving them credit for. So I do expect that offense to be slightly productive, but I don't expect them to be running the ball, right? If they're playing from behind, you're looking at Davis Mills throwing the ball a ton. I'm trying to get some of those chunk plays through the air, that kind of thing. So if I'm targeting anyone on that team, it's more likely the wide receivers. So I wouldn't be playing Mark Ingram if I were you. There's also a lot of running backs in that backfield, people like Phillip Lindsay, people like David Johnson as well. So not only are you dealing with a bad game script, but you're also dealing with other running backs eating into his production. So I would say no. Tyreek Hill there, $8,600. Obviously, I am pairing him up with Patrick Mahomes on this slate, which is surprising to me. I'm not sure why my optimizer is allowing me to get Patrick Mahomes and Tyreek Hill, considering that's a more expensive stack. But I guess it likes it a whole lot more in terms of a ceiling projection, that kind of thing. So if I'm going to end up getting Davante Adams, I'm probably going to have to eat into this Tyreek Hill ownership a little bit. So we'll have to make that decision when we get off stream here. But I do expect that to be something I do. Tyreek Hill I have currently at 40% ownership. If I have to take him at 30% to try and force in more Davante Adams, so be it. I'm still getting leverage on both players. Cooper Kupp I have 25% of right now. So if you guys saw my core plays video, I said I was going to try and force in these guys, and I didn't even have to do that. I just ran my base set of projections, running my target shares based on game totals, expected snaps, that kind of thing. And Cooper Kupp, Tyreek Hill, and 1% of Davante Adams still got through. So I'm going to try and get more Adams, but these two were well represented in my poll in terms of ownership. Just to give you guys an idea, we're looking at 40% Tyreek Hill, 41% Cooper Kupp, and again, 1% Davante Adams, which we expect to change. Let's talk about some of the guys that aren't quite as expensive. So people that aren't quite premium options. DJ Moore ended up being a yes. He was somebody who was a no for me at the beginning of the week, but as I've ran my projections, his target share of late's just been through the roof. He got 13 targets last week, only secured 5 catches. That's the main reason I want to play him, is if he's getting 13 targets, it doesn't matter who the hell you are, you're going to put up a massive performance, particularly in formats here where we have PPR. So as Giants defense, they don't necessarily have some shutdown corner out there. I mean, Bradbury has been decent to this point, but he's not shadowing receivers. He's playing over there on the right side. He's got his home over there on Bradbury Island, whatever you want to call it. Shout out to Darrelle Revis from back in the day. But I like him there at $7,100. Terry McLaurin there at $6,900. I like going to. He's a very good option for a buyback on this Packers game. So in the games where I am stacking up Aaron Rodgers, a lot of the buybacks are Terry McLaurin. Another buyback I'm using from that game would, I guess, be Ricky Seals-Jones. I'd have to double check my exposures, but I have a good amount of Ricky Seals-Jones in there too. Mike Evans, he's a play because AB is out. So now they just have Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. I just don't have an absurd amount of either one. So for me, I have Chris Godwin at 35%. I have 21% Tyler Johnson, though. That's extremely notable. So Tyler Johnson, if you guys aren't familiar, he's going to be the third wide receiver for this team. He was drafted in the second round 2 years ago. And then completely disappeared because they have all these stud wide receivers there. Even Scotty Miller is playing ahead of him. But in games where we've had garbage time, Tyler Johnson's been the number one guy to end up coming into the game, and he's been productive when he's played. He's had some catches. He's caught almost every single target he's had go his way. And some of them, because I've seen them at the end of these games, they're impressive catches. He has very good ability to on the sideline. He's also a relatively large wide receiver. So again, he's only $3,000. So we haven't gone quite that far down the board yet. But I do have a good amount of Tyler Johnson, also quite a bit of Chris Godwin. Chris Godwin's obviously cheaper than Mike Evans. You get a $600 difference there. Also a little bit more PPR upside with Chris Godwin. So I don't hate either one. I had 17% Mike Evans, by the way. So nothing crazy there, but enough to get some leverage at the very least. Jamar Chase is a fade for me, and a lot of it comes down to matchup. He's going to be matched up with Marlon Humphrey, who, in my opinion, is a top 5 cornerback in the NFL. So Jamar Chase, he's been deep play dependent to this point. And if there's one thing that Marlon Humphrey's good at, it's neutralizing the deep threat. He's one of the fastest cornerbacks in the NFL. And even Jamar Chase is not faster than Marlon Humphrey. So I expect that to be a situation that I'm avoiding. Same thing with Julio Jones. The guy is made of glass. I can't even trust that he's going to finish the first quarter, let alone this game. Brandon Cooks there at $6,000. I love him as a buyback for any of my Kyler Murray stacks. I have about 10% Kyler Murray, which isn't crazy leverage on the field. I believe he's being owned at about 7% of lineups, so actually pretty negligible there. By the way, guys, anytime you're talking about leverage, you're probably trying to talk about at least twice the field in terms of your ownership. There's a couple of reasons why. First of all, if you get slightly over the field in terms of your ownership, you're hardly paying the rake. In almost every contest, especially large field GPPs, you're dealing with 18 to 25% of rake. So if you're matching the field, you're not really matching the field. Just keep that in mind. Even a 10% exposure mark to a 7% owned player is hardly getting over the rake for me. So that's why, it's hard for me to say I'm getting leverage on somebody like a Kyler Murray. Either way, I will be playing quite a bit of Brandon Cooks as a buyback for those stacks. Sterling Shepard's out now. So we obviously had Dropping Birdies let us know that in the chat, which thank you for, by the way. That just creates such a shit show for this Giants team. I'm probably avoiding it. Darius Slayton, I'm assuming the active. Actually, speaking of that, guys, let's pause real quick. Let's go over to an injury report because it's about that time to check this out again. Let me go ahead and I'll share this time so you guys can follow along. Share screen. All right. I'm just going to bring it up in ESPN because they're actually pretty good about updating this. All right. So 1 o'clock games, all of this we already knew about. Tyreek Hill active, and we knew that. Devontae Parker inactive. Already had that down. Preston Williams active. I kind of expected him to be out, but that's not going to change much. He's a low usage player at best. Shepard inactive. Tony and Galladay, we already knew they weren't going to be playing. Okay, here. This is what I was looking for. John Ross and Slayton are both active. So for me, this is what the wide receiver core looks like for them. So this is how I would project it. Darius Slayton, clear number 1 wide receiver there. Number 2, Colin Johnson. Number 3, John Ross. And I'm expecting John Ross to be the guy they put in the slot just because he's probably the best route runner of the bunch. Also the smallest of the bunch. Probably not somebody they want to be running on the outside. So for me, if you're going to, again, play anyone from that team, it'd go Slayton, Johnson, then Ross. But I don't love any of them. Evan Ingram being active, that offense would probably be better if he was inactive. So that should tell you everything you need to know about my opinion on him. Julio Jones active, again, we expected that, but I'm not playing him. He's probably going to be used a little bit more as a decoy than an actual player, which that's always, dangerous to say because Julio has a very good price tag on this slate. He just hasn't been very effective at this point. He had that one good game, I believe, in week 3 or week 2 was one of the 2 weeks, and hasn't really done anything since then. Gibson active. He said he'd be confident he would play. I mean, that doesn't really mean anything. So I'm still worried about the share of rushes there between him and somebody like J.D. McKissick. And yeah, we're not going to have anything for the 4 o'clock game. So let's go ahead and get that out of there. All right. Getting back to our projections. Let's go ahead and do that. Share screen. Wide receivers. All right. So Jalen Waddle's been getting a ton of targets for this Dolphins team, and he actually has one of the lowest average air yards of any player in the entire league. He's caught most of his targets. That's because most of them are short targets. So I don't hate going there. He's really good in PPR formats. If you're in a season-long fantasy league where you're not getting any PPR production, you might want to avoid him. He's just probably a little bit overrated in your league. Let's talk about Devonta Smith. I'm not massive on Devonta Smith. I just like the price tag. It's $5,400. I don't have huge aspirations for somebody like Jalen Hurts, but for Devonta Smith to go out there, get you 80 yards, 5 catches, and a touchdown, that is well within his range of outcomes. And at that kind of price tag, that would be more than enough to pay that off. So that's why I'm not avoiding him, even though I am avoiding somebody like Jalen Hurts. Allen Robinson has a really tough matchup against this Buccaneers team. But the cornerbacks are all injured. They have hardly any healthy bodies even available in that secondary. I believe the only healthy starter they have left is Jordan Whitehead, who's an excellent safety, but he's not going to be in man-to-man coverage with somebody like Allen Robinson. So even though he's questionable, he is active in this game. The questionable tag was from earlier on in the week. If there's going to be anybody on this Bears team that I go to, it is going to be Allen Robinson, but that would be probably the only option I'm willing to stomach. Robbie Anderson here at $4,800. Again, this matchup against the Giants just gets better and better, especially with all these injuries. It's looking like it's going to be an absolute rout, probably like a 13, maybe even 20-point victory, that kind of thing for the Panthers. Robbie Anderson got 8 targets last week. He had 10 targets the week before. Had a grand total of 7 catches between the two, which the guy just can't catch the ball for whatever reason. But with all of those targets, with all that opportunity, we should expect him to have a spike week at some point. So I've been beating the drum on Robbie Anderson for quite some time. I'm not quite willing to give up on him quite yet. Hunter Renfrow at $4,800. Very similar story, just a little bit more consistent. Obviously, gets you a ton of PPR upside given his skill set on third down. So I like going there. Tyler Boyd, somebody who gets a little bit of a boost just because of Jamar Chase getting less targets. I do expect Joe Burrow to look elsewhere rather than try to target somebody like Marlon Humphrey. So people like Tyler Boyd, people like CJ Uzuma, or even people like T. Higgins could get some extra targets there. So I like going there in a few of my lineups. Nico Hardman, I'm using him in Chief stacks. Pretty obvious there. He plays about 61% of snaps for them over his last 2 weeks. Could be trending slightly downwards just because of Byron Pringle being in the mix, now Josh Gordon also being in the mix, but I don't think that's going to significantly take away from him. Diami Brown is in some of my lineups as a buyback for that Packers stack. Van Jefferson Jr. is in my lineups. A lot of people, again, I am playing some stacks for Matthew Stafford, just not a ton of them. And Van Jefferson Jr. is at least a way to make it slightly more affordable because that is one of the most expensive spots on the slate. Rashad Bateman is one of my favorite value plays on the slate. I have him at 35% ownership right now. So actually one of my highest owned wide receivers on the slate, period. He's only $3,400. He had 8 targets in his first game ever in the NFL. He's extremely athletic. He's extremely good after the catch, which is a perfect fit for this Ravens offense. I mean, this is a team that obviously loves stretching it down the field with somebody like a Marquise Brown, that kind of thing. But they need somebody to take balls after the catch. They need that guy who can take those little short routes when they're needed because teams are going to blitz Lamar Jackson at times. And there's going to be times where he needs to get it out quick. And at this point, Marquise Brown is kind of meh at that. He's more of a deep play threat. Obviously, Mark Andrews, not necessarily the epitome of quickness or anything like that. But Rashad Bateman, he's exactly that kind of player. You can put him out on the flats. You can throw these little screen routes, these little crossing routes, that kind of thing. And he can really make his hay there. So I think he's a perfect fit for this offense. I think he's a extremely high upside play, especially at $3,400. I was a little bit higher in Nick Westbrook-Ikhine going into the week. Obviously, $3,300 is a really good price tag. Obviously, one of the best matchups to target on this entire slate. The issue with him is that Julio Jones is active for whatever reason, which I would have expected them to have him down for at least one game, given his injury history. But if he ends up getting injured, that kind of thing, Westbrook-Ikhine could end up getting his targets that way. So I'm a little bit less bullish on him now than I was at the beginning of the week. I believe, let me go ahead and check to get it exact. I know he's in my pool at the very least. Let's see, 3% ownership. So yeah, hardly in my pool anymore. Again, a lot of that had to do with Julio Jones expected to be active. And now we know he's active for sure. Tyler Johnson, and Danny Amendola, these are the last two guys I want to talk about here, wide receiver. John Ross, you can definitely play. You can see I already expected him to at least be starting, but now that Sterling Shepard's not playing, obviously gets a little bit more of a boost. He had that one massive catch his first ever game for the Giants. It kind of fell off since then. But Tyler Johnson, I have 21% ownership. I can end up probably closer to 30% by the time the game time comes around. Again, he's the number 3 wide receiver for this team. You're going to remember AB is quote unquote the number 3 wide receiver for Tampa Bay. He's averaging over 17 fantasy points a game. Now, we don't need anything close to that many fantasy points for Tyler Johnson to pay off, but this Bears team is shoddy at best in general, especially on the defensive side of things. So at a 14.5 point projection, he's the highest point per dollar play on the entire slate, period, regardless of position. So I'm definitely going to have a ton of them. Danny Amendola there at $3,000. He's going to be playing for the Texans. Again, the Cardinals defense is pretty stout, but we're expecting quite a bit of garbage time production. So at $3,000, you're going to get a guy who's completely unowned that actually has a decent point per dollar type production there. And yeah, that's it at wide receiver. So let's go over the tight end and finish the stream up. Share screen. And by the way, I'll remind you, if you have any questions, make sure to put them in the chat. After we finish up the tight ends here, we'll go through our defenses for like a minute. There's like 3 or 4 I want to talk about. I'm only playing 6 defenses on the slate. There's some really good options. And then we're going to hop on out of here so I can finish making my lineups and whatnot. So let's go through these tight ends. Let's try to do this one a little bit quicker here. So first and foremost, Travis Kelce. You're going to have him in some of your Chiefs stacks. He just gets targeted a ton. Very high over-under game. So probably didn't have to say much more than that to get you on him. Darren Waller at $50. No, it's not $50. $6,000 exactly. $6,700. Sorry, I can't read. I don't hate going there. He was in my core plays video. Again, it's a relatively soft matchup against this Eagles team. And I do like stacking up Derek Carr today. So he is making some of those lineups. Mark Andrews, I have some Lamar Jackson. So I'm going to, by default, have some Mark Andrews. TJ Hawkinson, he's finally back at full health, it seems. Has been dealing with that lingering injury for quite some time. If you're going to target anybody in the passing game against this Rams team, you want it to be the tight ends. You can see their 16th ranked defense against tight ends. They're the number 1 ranked team against wide receivers. So huge disparity there. Obviously, the cornerback talent for the Rams is immense, but some of their cover linebackers, that's not necessarily the case. So I like some of the matchups that he could see there. Dallas Goedert, very good option against the Raiders team. Again, if you're going to play anybody from the Philadelphia Eagles, for me, it's going to be Devontae Smith or Dallas Goedert. That's probably about it. Tyler Higbee, if you want to stack up the Matthew Stafford team, the Rams, that kind of thing, you can do that. And Zach Ertz in his first game for the Cardinals, I am all over. I have 30% exposure to Zach Ertz right now. Robert Tonyan, I have 25% of. Same thing with OJ Howard. So I'm definitely spending down at tight end a little bit more than I'm spending up. I have 20% Travis Kelce right now. Let me see Darren Waller. I'm not even sure Darren Waller's in my – it was at least in my initial – no, he is. I have 11% Darren Waller in my initial build, which isn't anything crazy. But I like these guys down here a little bit more. Again, it's almost half the price. With Robert Tonyan, you're dealing with somebody who's due for crazy regression in terms of his touchdown production. With OJ Howard, you have somebody who's seemingly the number 1 tight end for his team now. Obviously, Rob Gronkowski is not active. Cameron Brate was hardly a factor in the offense last week. And OJ Howard was the one who had set up plays for him. He had screens that were set up for him. Plenty of plays where he was chipping as a blocker. And then the setup play was for him to be a leak out screen, that kind of thing. Anytime you see a player getting plays set up for him, that is a very good sign. I cannot stress this enough. And obviously, that's not something that you can necessarily see in the stats. You have to be watching the game. But OJ Howard was clearly somebody they wanted involved in that offense, and you saw that in terms of production. You can see all these cheap options. If you really need to add somebody to your player pool, go ahead and do it. But I'm not playing any of them. I don't think any of them are warranted. Ryan Griffin's at least starting. You at least have that, but that's the Jets offense. They're complete dog shit. CJ Uzuma, actually, I should mention, I do have Uzuma just because of some of my Bengals stacks there and some of my Bengals buybacks. Obviously, because I have Lamar Jackson as a quarterback some places, I need some Bengals players as buybacks. So that's going to be it for tight end. I don't think there's anything crazy of note there. Try to fit in those guys up top if you can, but there's quite a few value plays in the slate that I like. But now for our defenses. Let me bring them up on my end. There we go. All right. There's quite a few defenses I like and quite a few that are just straight up avoiding. First of all, Rams defense against the Lions. Great option to go to. Going to have plenty of them. Buccaneers, going to have plenty of them. Bears are horrible. Justin Fields is a turnover machine. Love going to both of those defenses. Another guy I love going to, this Patriots defense against the Jets. Same reason. Zach Wilson, complete dog shit. Bill Belichick, one of the best defensive coaches in NFL history, if not the best NFL history. So like going there in terms of defense. I love going to the Cardinals defense. And this is really the last one I'm going to talk about because all these rest of them that I have as guesses are just people that I'm mixing in. Cardinals defense against the Texans, probably the best play on the slate at defense. Obviously the Texans, not one of the better offenses in the NFL, dealing with an 18-point spread. So it's just a slam dunk play. So I like going there quite a bit. And then if you want to mix in anyone, you could go to some of these guys, but they're obviously a lot cheaper. They're much lower projected defenses. So yeah, that's going to be it, guys. Thank you guys for stopping by. As always, we're going to be doing this every week, every Sunday at 11:30 a.m. Eastern time. Obviously have the regular DFS content out on the channel. We have golf content coming next week. We got the Bermuda Championship. So any of you golf people out there, we will be covering that. And of course, at some point, we are going to be adding NBA into the mix. So I'm thinking it's going to be live streams for the NBA. NBA is by far my most profitable sport. It's just something that's hard to do content for. It's daily based, even more so than something like NBA where you're dealing with it once a week, or golf where it's once a week. With NBA, it's truly, content expires in about 10, 12 hours. So sometimes even quicker than that. So we'll have to figure out what we can do for that. But until then,